service to my fellow man and my country, and not end up in jails and in goonie roofs and in alleys and in missions. And then I was trying to live the code of living my mother and father wanted me to live because they had all the money. And if you had already been in all the trouble I had been in and getting ready to get into, it takes a lot of money to get you out so you can get back in it again. And then I'm trying to live the code of living that alcohol is demanding all my life, and you're way ahead of me. And here I am, I'm sitting at that AA meeting on the back row. There's not a back door. There's not a window to jump out of. That woman talking about Christ, and I'm wanting a drink so bad it's killing me. And every time I walked through 80 people, it looked like 80 people stood up, turned around, pointed fingers, and looked at me and said, "Shut up and sit here and listen, and this is for you." And I hated every member of Alcoholics Anonymous that was in that meeting and the horse and wagons that brung them across country. And I made a deal with those people in Alcoholics Anonymous right there and then, that if they did not give me a good drink of alcohol right there in that meeting and let me drink it, or go out to my car and take a real good drink and come back into the meeting, that I was not going to listen to anything those people had to say. And that deal darn near killed me. And it wasn't until I come to Alcoholics Anonymous 17 years later, a hulk of a human being. I hope I never forget it. And I walked in and they shoved a book in my hand called Alcoholics Anonymous. May I remind every member of Alcoholics Anonymous in this room meeting, every member of Al-Anon and Alateens if they're here, or if there's anyone in the room that love us or hate us, that are not members of any of the cooperating fellowships. It is the only two books in print with the two words on it. There's not another book greater than, more than, less than. It's not it. And I don't know about you, but I wonder how many of us stop and realize that when we tell anyone, any place, anywhere, that we're members of Alcoholics Anonymous, how many of us stop and realize that we are the results of what's in that book? Because it is within the covers of the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and specifically the first 164 pages, where our entire recovery program is, and not out of context. And you may say, well, why Al-Anon? I don't know how many of the drunks read the Al-Anon traditions, but their tradition, fifth tradition, is threefold. And the second part of that tradition specifically says, in the Al-Anon, and we live the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, which was so freely and given to Al-Anon at the request of Lois and her friends when they started Al-Anon many, many years ago. And so as a result of all of this, and they shoved it in, and and they used to call me boy. And they say, "Boy, bring that book to us." And I take the book to them. And my first book, I wrote a hot check on a non-existent bank to buy that book that night. Well, you said get one, and I got one. You didn't tell me how. And so it was this second edition. And right down at the bottom of it, because the triangle and the circle is right in the middle of the dust cover in that particular printing. And right down the bottom it said, "This is the basic text." And they said, "Boy, that means that that's the foundation. That's where you start." And then they said, "Open up the book and turn to the first page." And I did, and that's a fly leaf. It's nothing on it. And they say, "What's on that page?" And I said, "Nothing." They said, "You know why nothing's on that page?" And I'd say, "No." They say, "'Cause you don't know nothing." They said, "If you knew anything about living sober, you would not need this book." And then they said, "Turn it 2 pages over." And I did. And they said, "Read to us the year that the book was printed that you're holding." And I read them the year. And they said, "Now we're going to give you the key." They said, "David, the key to living the recovery program of Alcoholics Anonymous and the AA way of life." He said, "There are hundreds of thousands of alcoholics such as you who have come to AA, are coming to AA, and will come to AA, who will try to change what's in that book. You let what's in that book change you. And then talk it over with the experienced, sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous." And he said, "Now we want you to start reading that book from the front. Don't you open up the end of the book and start reading them stories in the end, because you're not at the end of your problem. And don't open it up in the middle of the book because you're not in the middle of your problem. You start from the front because every word, every paragraph, every chapter meshes in and fits, and it culminates in a vision for you. And so, being practically unemployable in those days, I took that book and I started reading it. And I got to the doctor's opinion, and being a part of the medical profession, that interests me immensely. And I began to read it, and here's a little physician by the name of Dr. William Silkworth, who treated over 40,000 alcoholics before AA got off the ground, and over 10,000 after AA got started. A little physician that our co-founder Bill lovingly used to call the little physician with the smiling china blue eyes. A little physician who in his day was a neurologist. One of the two most famous medical men in North America in the treating of our kind of people in his day. A little physician who wrote the first article about the physical nature of our illness. A little physician who forsake fame and fortune to stand at the firing line of our kind of people through heartaches and suicides and going back and getting drunk again. A little physician who laid out I recovered from so beautifully in the doctor's opinion. And you know, it stood the acid of time. It had to be, because today it is the basis of every successful treatment modality for an alcoholic in the world today. And Silky writes that men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. God, that shot the balloon out of the air. I thought I was drinking because of the kind of woman I was married to. I thought I was drinking because of them two rotten boys. I thought I was drinking because of my color, my hair, my size, my religion. I thought I was drinking because the Republicans was in and the Democrats was out. I thought I was drinking because I was recalled back in the service. No, men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. And although we will admit it is elusive, we will admit that it is injurious, there comes a time when we cannot differentiate the true and the false. And then the alcoholic believes his life to be the only one. Well, doesn't everybody get drunk on Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, St. Patty's Day, July the 4th, when the sun goes up, the sun goes down, the sun just lays there? A drunk could be passed out 3 weeks on his back on the floor right here. You kick him, wake him up. Been drinking 2 beers and he'll fall back down. Never 1, never 3, never 5, never 10. It's real. And Silky writes, we're restless, irritable, and discontented. I never was restless and irritable and discontented when I was drinking. I was drunk. It's in between drunks that I was restless, irritable, and discontented. And until we can again experience the ease and comfort which seems to come at once after taking a few drinks. Drinks that we see others taking with impunity. My wife, you say, why don't you drink like Herman? I said, I don't want to drink like Herman. I don't even like Herman. So why don't you drink like so-and-so? I said, fine, get him over to the house Saturday night. So-and-so would come over and I'd feed him alcohol like I'm drinking. Come on, don't drink like a little baby. Drink. An hour and a half later, so-and-so would be passed out on his back on my living room rug. And my foot would be on his navel. And I'd look at my wife and I'd say, and you want me to drink like this bum here? My wife, you say, why don't you drink like a man? I said, I'm drinking with both fists. What else you want me to do? But here it comes. Once we succumb to the desire again, and unfortunately many of us will, here comes the thing that separates our kind from the so-called social drinker. I was a social drinker. I drank with anybody. Normal drinker. I don't know what a normal drink of alcohol is. A normal drink of alcohol for me used to be get you a pint of cheap whiskey and cheap wine, knock the cap off, suck her down in one swallow, and go for another. But once it sets up this phenomenon of craving for alcohol. My God, how my body craved alcohol when I was drinking. And that is where I found out what was wrong with me at that last meeting on the last Sunday in August of 1950. Remember I told you I got up at 5:30 in the morning and started drinking. Knew I was going to have me a drink. And right there and then, in those few words, in that book, in the doctor's opinion, I found the exact reason why I needed that drink, living a lifestyle on my own, drinking alcohol. My body was craving that alcohol. Remember I told you I knew I was going to have me a drink. My body was screaming out for a drink. And you know, when an alcoholic's body screams out for a drink, and living a lifestyle on our own, a mental obsession so powerful that condemns us to drink against our own will, and the physical nature of our illness condemns us to die if we continue to drink, then there is no gray area. And then Silky says, once we succumb to desire, and sets up this phenomenon of craving, and we go through that well-known spree, ending up remorseful, screaming to anybody that will listen to us. And yet we did it again, and again, and again, and again, and again. And here's where Dr. Silkworth lays out our recovery program so beautifully and so simply, when he says, until such a person experiences an entire psychic change, there is very little hope for his recovery. Now, how in Alcoholics Anonymous do we experience an entire psychic change? As a result of our ideals that are firmly grounded in a power greater than ourselves. And how in Alcoholics Anonymous do we firmly ground our ideals in a power greater than ourselves? Step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then our co-founders knew we'd be restless, irritable, and discontented. They knew that we would want more, that they wouldn't be satisfied just working and fixing drunks, that we're going to have to heal the whole world. And as AA began to get itself into a lot of problems, and anonymity breaks, still happening, aren't they? Bill said there's going to come a day, boys and girls, when some members of Alcoholics Anonymous will start making some big money at the expense of the members of AA and the expense of Alcoholics Anonymous and the expense of our recovery program. And he never has been off the mark. But watch them. They ain't dead yet. They're not dead yet. And so out of necessity, they gave us 12 more spiritual principles to live by, called our 12 traditions. And that first tradition is, honey, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA unity. Common problem, common solution, common recovery, common Father, the oneness of one. And then in 1962, Bill, through the conference, gave us 12 more spiritual principles to live by, called our 12 concepts of world service. So that our literature and all of our entities and everything, the singleness of purpose, but more important, our second tradition. For our ultimate authority, there is a loving God, not the oldest sober member in the group, not a guru, not anything else but God. The God that we find in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we carried and lived with each other in our own groups and other AA groups and AA groups as a whole, and AA in the world in which we all live in. And to see that our literature stays ungarbled for the singleness of purpose. Well, and then Silky Word writes, to those who do not understand, after one of our kind has undergone this entire psychic change, a person has been doomed hopeless and helpless and has so many problems, they'll never be able to comprehend how they'll ever be able to solve them, can now very easily control their desire for alcohol. The only thing being that to be willing to follow a few simple rules. Now, Silkworth being a non-alcoholic, he says, rules, our kind, we do not like rules, we do not like regulations, we do not like to be told what to or what not to do, we just say suggestions. But after you've been in AA for a while, those suggestions become rules. Well, as soon as that AA meeting was over with and everybody went to the birthday party, not me, I went out to my car, and I got in my car, and I got that half bottle of whiskey. Now, I don't know about anybody in here. I drank that half-fifth down in 2 swallows. Now, that's the way I drank alcohol. I didn't put it in a brandy glass and run around and sniff it for 5 hours and burn candles and incense and listen to Lawrence Welk. And I didn't put an inch in a glass, 14 ice cubes, 9.5 inches of something else, a straw and a fruit and a cherry, and a half a Christmas tree on top of it, and suck on it for about 3 hours. To me, that's sick drinking. I drank her down that hole where it'll do the most good and put another one down. But let me tell you what happened to me. When I got down, my hair laid back down. I quit perspiring. My toes went back in those alligator shoes. I ran up the steps, got a hold of the oldest sober member that was sober in that group, got to arguing about the quality of y'all's fellowship. And he said something to me, and I hit him. And when I was drinking, I was bad to hit folks. Taller than me, shorter than me, fatter than me, skinnier than me. And 2 of his AA babies joined in, and we started a fight. And as far as I was concerned, that fight was a lot better than that AA meeting, because I was just whipping the dickens out of them two little sober drunks, and then they did an unfair thing. They ran in two more drunks the size of the outside linebackers on any professional football team, and finally four of them picked me up bodily, two on each side, and threw me right out of that AA group. As I'm flying through the air, one of them said, "We do not need your kind here." And another one said, "And furthermore, you're too young to be an alcoholic." And I stood on that grass that Sunday evening, drunk, belligerent, with my fist clenched, screaming and hollering and cursing to anybody that would listen to me that I would never come back to this Christ soul-saving organization as long as I lived, that I was not an alcoholic, I was too young an alcoholic. But the next 17 years, everything that could possibly happen to a human being happened to this human being. And the only three things that never did happen to me, getting ready to get on a drunk, coming off a drunk right to this very second, is I never did willfully murder another human being, fall in love with another man, or die drunk. Other than that, it all happened. So I won't offend anybody's feelings. I guess blackouts don't count, you know. I'd married this wonderful gal, and God, when we got married, she didn't realize that she was marrying an alcoholic. And when we got married, we did not start to build a marriage. We started to build a booby trap, one that could go off in any week or any month or any year. And I was called back into the service. Didn't have to go. Gave me a chance to get way away from my wife, my creditors, my nagging, everything. I was called back as a naval dental officer and ended up with a combat Marine division. And I got in more trouble than there's trouble. Christmas Day, 54. I'm laying in a prison. And I didn't know how I got there until after I got there. I had a leg iron locked around my right leg, and the chain welded the leg iron. The other end of the chain welded a steel cot, the four-legged steel cot immersed in concrete, and there were armed guerrillas around me 24 hours a day daring me to move. They only had room for 128, and the word was when you got there, you would never leave. And I saw how some of them left with sheets from the top of their head down to their toes. It was almost as bad as any concentration camp ever devised by man, and it's certainly as bad as any prisoner of war camp devised by man, because that's before they changed the code. And I'd been laying in there, and I was laying there like that for one solid year. I'd been there 7.5 months, and because of my insolence, because of my arrogance, and just being plain ugly and uncooperative, 4.5 of that 7.5 months I was on straight bread and water. And here it is Christmas Day, 54, and I'm hating society because I know hundreds who have done far worse than me, and they're running loose. Why me? Why me? And you know, when you get thousands of miles away from your mama and your papa, and you ain't got a nickel, and there's no way for a phone, you talk about lonesomeness, and you talk about loneliness, and you talk about blackness, and you talk about despair, and you talk about just not wanting to live. And fear. And the only thing that kept me half sane, somebody had smuggled in a serviceman's Gideon Bible, both the Old and the New Testament. I know that thing backwards, sideways, upside down, crosswise, any way you look. It's all I had to read. And I had to hide it when they were looking at it. And here it is Christmas Day, and I'm hating society. And then comes the orderly with the Christmas dinner. And I've been in lots of places to where they don't give you knives and forks, they give you a spoon. And if they let you out of your iron doggy house, they count the spoons before you go back in. And I've been in a few of them. And this was one of them. Well, they don't give you knives and forks and spoons. Oh, it's no big deal. You learned how to eat soup with your fingers and dream there's chicken in it. You know, hate and resentment can carry you for a long while, but it warps the human mind. And here comes in with the Christmas dinner, and he's saying, ho, 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 Merry Christmas. And I'm so full of Christmas spirit and joy for my fellow man, I say, ho, 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 you know what? He says, you sorry, no good so-and-so, here's your dinner. And when he handed it to me, I picked it up and I hit him right in the face with it. My Christmas gift for doing it that day was 45 more straight days on bread and water. Now that's what you call a bad day. I have not had a day that bad since I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous, and neither have you. Compared to what? Compared to what? Yeah, I got it out by hook or crook. I used my father's good name and everybody he knew, and some of them took their lives as a result of their involvement with me, and they were hellacious men to be made. I talked my wife into taking me back, and we started moving. And so we decided we're going to move out to Panhandle of West Texas to raise our two little boys in a Christian environment. I don't know if any of y'all ever lived in a town of 3,500 that lives in a Christian environment. That's a town that votes dry and drinks wet. And the two most popular people in the town is the undertaker and the bootlegger. And I'm drinking to where I'm drinking every day, and I got up to where I weighed 250 pounds, and my blood pressure's so high that every time my pulse would eat, my hair would stand straight and pump like oil well. Had a fat doctor friend in the next town go up to see him. He takes one look at me. He says, "My God, you look sick." Puts the cuff around my arm, runs the air up. He says, "My God, David, it's a miracle you're alive. Your blood pressure's so high." Then he says, "You know why your blood pressure's so high?" He said, "Because you're so fat. And the reason you're so fat is because you eat so much. And the reason you eat so much is because you don't have any guts and you don't have any willpower." And he said, "I'm going to have to give you some help." And he wrote me a prescription for 60 of the most beautiful capsules I have ever seen in my life, called Nemudons. And he says, "Take them as directed." So I said, "Doctor, is there all right if I drink a couple of beers while I'm taking this stuff?" He said, "I don't think it'll hurt you. You never should have told me that." So I went home and I had the prescription filled and went home to lose weight and stay drunk. Well, I looked at the prescription and it says take one 3 times a day after meal. Well, who eats when you drink? And every good self-respectful drinking drunk knows if one's good, 2's better, 3's terrific. So I just took 3 of them, drank some whiskey, didn't feel like I was losing any weight. Took 3 more, drank some more whiskey, went into the bathroom, turned sideways in the mirror, didn't look like I was losing any weight. Come out and took a handful of them, drank some more whiskey. Looked like my stomach's getting bigger. Finally, I took all the pills and drank all the whiskey. And the next thing I knew, I was out in my backyard and I was picking peaches off of rose bushes out on my gun. And they tell me I ran around that little town for 3,500 for 2 days, talking in the unknown tongue. And being one of 2 Jewish families in 5 counties around, they gathered everybody in to see and hear the miracle. Because word had spread like wildfire. The Jew had caught the Holy Ghost. And when I come to and realized what happened, I said, "My God, them pills are messing up my drinking," you know. Oh, I'd been to the psychiatrist, all the questions he asked me, my wife used to ask me for nothing. Oh, we had to leave that town. And we finally moved back, but I'm taking me with me. With a wonderful opportunity, not long before I'm back on that last skid row, emptying them wine bottles and sleeping in 55-cent night hotel rooms with shoes tied around your neck. And somewhere along the line on April 18th of 1967, I don't know, I found the handwriting on the floor of the county jail in Dallas, Texas. Now, I've been in lots of jails. And being in jail is not one of the requirements for membership in Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, this time I run out of everything and everybody, and I got down to me, and me couldn't stay sober, and me couldn't stay drunk, and me couldn't kill myself, and me couldn't stay alive, and me didn't want me as me was, but me's going me every place me went. And I screamed out on that jail floor with no conditions attached, "God, please help me. Please help me." And I know right this very second that there not only is a God for me then, as there is right this very second, because I am still here, and I have not had a drink of alcohol. And I said, if I ever get out of this jail, I'm going to look up those people in Alcoholics Anonymous. And how I got by that old sheriff, I don't know. Because the next to the last time I was in his jail, as I was being let out, he said, "Boy, if you ever show up in my jail again for drinking or drunk and the things that you do, I'll have you put away to where you will never bother another human being, bird, tree, dog, or rock." And I heard him so well, I walked right out of that jail, right across the street to a whiskey shop, got me another bottle of that muscadoodle, and got out in the park with the rest of them winos and pigeons and grinned and said I beat him again. But how I got by him this time, I don't know. When I got out, I found out the gal Edith, who asked me to come to that AA meeting, God bless her, she had passed away, but she was continuously sober when she passed away. Her sponsor, Moena, had moved away. But after I was sober 9 months, Moena moved back. She was the secretary of our group, and then she went back to manicuring. And I used to see her every Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock as my manicurist. And last March, 2 years ago, Moena passed away. And if she had lived for 2 more months, she would have been continuously sober 37 years in Alcoholics Anonymous. And there was a man at that meeting, he was sober 8 years. He drank for 8 years. And this past May, he celebrated his 23rd continuous sobriety this stretch. And he is my sponsor. He has always been my sponsor. And he's the only one that I knew that was at that meeting. I called him up. He wanted to know who it was for. I said, it's for me. He said, well, we have a meeting tomorrow night. Let's just go and get it over with. And don't you take a drink of alcohol today and call me at 7:30 in the morning. And that's all he said. And he hung up. Boom. Well, after 37 and a half years of giving it the best shot, it was cold turkey. Well, it's more like frozen buzzard, if you want to know the truth of the matter. I started walking and shaking out of drunk. And when I come to the next morning, I was sober, and I didn't have a belly full of tranquilizers, nor did I have a prescription for 500 more. And for this, I'm thankful. I called him at 7:30. He said, are you drinking? And I said, no. He says, don't you take a drink today, and call me at 3:30. Boom, and he hung up. Started that walking and that shaking, and I called him at 3:30. He said, are you drinking? And I says, no. He said, do you really want to come to an AA meeting? I said, more than anything else in this world, I don't want to drink alcohol anymore. He said, do you want me to come get you? And being about as humble as Gaddafi, I said, I'll get there under my own steam. And he told me where it was. And he says, and when you show up there, don't you be drunk and don't you be drinking because I'm going to smell you. And he said, David, if you're drinking or drunk, I'm going to throw you right through the front door. You, David, cannot come to Alcoholics Anonymous drinking or drunk. Now, I know that's not the standard principles because I bring a lot of wet ones to their first meeting. Brought one the other day. But he told me that for a reason. You see, he was one of them little drunks that I was beating the devil out of at that meeting on the last Sunday. You know, he didn't want no part of me drinking. Well, after he hung up, I was in a terrible predicament because I was in the same clothes I'd been in for a year. Old pair of thermal underwear, an old pair of gray flannel breeches with all my possessions in my pocket, an old gray sweater with the elbows out the elbows, no socks, but I still hadn't quite lost everything yet. Had a pair of beat-up old alligator shoes, and I had all the money I had was 30 cents, and that was all left from last blood. I'd sold blood to the blood bank to buy wine. And when you get there in that shape, one is not doing too well. And I heard my wife had thrown out all my clothes, so I called her up. I said, Grace, and she hadn't heard from me so long. She said, who is it? I said, me. She said, what do you want? I said, Grace, do you happen to have one of my old suits? She said, yes, I have one, and it's to bury you in. As I look back now, I then asked her the most foolish question I've ever asked that woman in my life. I said, do you mind if I borrow it for a little while? I'm going to an AA meeting. Said, another one of your lies, and hung up. That suit's stored itself. They allowed me to come into the house to put the suit on. Now, when I showed up in their house, there was an instant joy that I'm going to AA. God knows everything I looked at, walked by, touched, breathed on, inhaled, she'd run behind me and spray. And I got that suit on, and I bid she and the young'un goodbye, got into a Mustang that the bank was looking to repossess. It couldn't recognize it, looked like an accordion. And off I went to the AA meeting. And I walked in, and it looked like the same people that were there 17 years earlier. And one of them walked up to me, and he grinned, and he said, we knew you'd be back. And now I'm going to tell you about the greatest AA talk I've ever heard in my life. Every member of Alcoholics Anonymous heard it, and if your group hadn't told it to you, you've been cheated. In AA, we don't have any speakers. Ours is the language of the heart. And folks, not the language of the gutter, but the language of the heart. Because ours is an inside thing. And here it comes, and I've been privileged to hear AA's finest. Our co-founder, Bill, God, and I loved him and he loved me. And I met Bill when I was 5.5 months sober. I didn't have any money. I was unemployable, and a fine member of AA gave it to me as a gift. He said, I'm not loaning it to you. And when you get a few bucks in your pocket, just pass it on. Pass it on. And I was to do that before Bill died with one of my little babies in Alcoholics Anonymous. And, you know, and it's great. I found that Bill was a human being and he wasn't a guru. Yeah. But this is the greatest AA talk I've ever sat in my life. There's a man who stood at the door and greeted everybody. Here it comes. He said, welcome. Come in and sit down and have a cup of coffee. And let's talk about it. We understand exactly how you feel. He didn't say to me, you never should have done those things. He didn't say to me, if you really loved me, you wouldn't have done those things. He says, no. Welcome. Come in and sit down and have a cup of coffee and let's talk about it. We understand exactly how you feel. It was the first time the last 17 years of my drinking anyone shook my hand. The first time the last 17 years of my drinking that anyone welcomed me in. It was the first time the last 17 years of my drinking that anyone said, we understand exactly how you feel, and allowed me to tell another human being how I feel without telling me, shut up, you're rotten, you're sorry, you're no good, you should have been dead. And the first time the last 17 years of my drinking anyone let me sit with them and didn't throw me out because I smelled bad and I wasn't successful. And then I was disgraced to my family and to everybody else, and they left me, allowed me to share a cup of coffee with them. And when the meeting started, it was the first time the last 17 years of my drinking anyone allowed me to come and sit in a meeting with them. And I'm still shaking and I'm still jumping, and the drunks are on either side of me, and they've got their hands on my knees and my shoulders and my elbows, and they're saying, easy does it, first things first, this too will pass. And then when that was over with and everybody stood and said the Lord's Prayer, and I did not know the Lord's Prayer, and no one called me an atheist, no one called me an agnostic, and no one called me an idiot, and no one called me a dummy. And after that was over with, it was the first time the last 17 years of my drinking that people, they came up to me and they hugged me and they kissed me and they told me they loved me. And when I got ready to leave, it was the first time the last 17 years of my drinking, those fine, wonderful people said, David, please come back. We need you and you need us. Folks, that is Alcoholics Anonymous. Nothing more, nothing less. It's just God's grace working through the sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous, holding on and clinging to an alcoholic who thought life was over with, who had condemned his own self in his own mind that he was hopeless and helpless and useless, and life was over with. And you love me into sobriety, and you love me in the desire to wanting to live. You love me to the point that, yes, I'm willing to go to any length to get what you have and to maintain it. And when I got to you people, little I realized that my wife and 2 sons would ever be under one roof again, because that marriage had been written off by everything and everybody, and it had no right to be. But only because of God's grace through the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous in my life, and only because of God's grace through the miracle of Al-Anon in Grace's life, and that beautiful and wonderful lady this past June the 10th, we celebrated our 45th year. And that's pretty good for a drunk, although I was not there for many, many years. Now, I'm not going to stand up here and tell you, because I'm in AA and Grace's in Al-Anon, that our marriage is absolutely perfect, that the butterflies are cooing and winking, and the bluebirds are hugging and kissing. Heck no, we have a few short rounds every now and then. We have a few long rounds every now and then. That's what's called clearing the air, communicate. Best way I can describe our marriage today, it's built on solid, constructive imperfection, because it's by our imperfections that we grow. And anyway, I go to 6, 7, 8 meetings a week. Grace goes to 4, 5, 6 Al-Anon meetings a week. We don't see each other enough. to have all that nitpicking, arguing, and fighting and fussing. Our co-founder, Bill, many, many years ago, addressing our Canadian brothers and our American and Canadian brothers and sisters, said, you know, that the greatest thing that's happened in this world is the creation and the formation of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the second greatest thing that's happened in this world was the creation and the formation of Al-Anon. Because he says Al-Anon fills that vast void of broken relationships between blood, kin, and emotionally attached. And folks, whether we like it or not, that is the most distorted area. And thank God, by being able to have a complete program, the family, the alcoholics, which is alcoholics for alcoholics only, even though many of us have other problems, that umbrella covers it all. Al-Anon to others. Alateen, God bless them. What a wonderful, wonderful cooperating fellowship that is. When I got sober, I had to go see the regulatory agency that licensed my license to practice a profession. And I had to go tell them the truth. Not make promises. Promises kill our kind of people. I had to go tell them what I did and not promising I'll never do it again. And they let me go back to work. And I've been there ever since. Now, y'all have just heard the nicer parts of my story, and I'm asked all the time, David, you've been locked up and all this and all that. How did you ever finish school? Well, I was my class valedictorian in high school. I finished second of a class of 450 at Southern Methodist University. I'm a graduate of Baylor University College of Dentistry. And they say, how'd you do it? Real simple. You cheat. It does not take our long kind to find another human being who will do for us what we cannot possibly do for ourselves. Our two sons, God, today we not only have a wonderful father and son friendship, but more important, we're the best of friends. And Grace and I are blessed with the most beautiful daughter-in-law. And we have the most beautiful 5-year-old granddaughter that you could ever see in your life. She looked just like me. Brilliant. Her name is Abigail. Abigail Aronofsky, AA all the way. And so you see, and this is not me, this is all Alcoholics Anonymous, because ours is not a personal success story, but one of colossal human failure, converted into great strength by the alchemy of the living grace of God, as it expressed through the recovery program of Alcoholics Anonymous and our fellowship therein. And y'all have been so kind, and I love to leave you with a little thing that means so much to me. There's a little youngster that lived in an orphanage who had a terrible stuttering impediment. And he didn't want to be that way, and all the other kids used to get him to talk so he'd stutter because he would react, he'd cry and he'd scream and he'd kick. And he was the most miserable youngster that there was, and he tried to commit suicide by hanging himself in a tree, but he didn't. But something happened to that little youngster. All of a sudden he was walking around and he had a beautiful smile on his face, and he had a beautiful look in his eyes. And no matter how hard the youngsters tried to tease him to get him to talk, he wouldn't talk. You see, he had found the key. As long as he didn't try to utter the first syllable, there was no way in the world he would stutter.